Hey guys, tonight we step inside a smoky doorway in ancient inn, where the smell of bubbling stew, spilled ale, and old timber greets you before you've even taken off your cloak. The door creaks as you push it open, and the first breath you take is thick with history. Onions softened to mush, wood smoke curling from a fire that never dies, and the faint tang of wet wool left too long in the corner. You probably won't survive this place if you have allergies, or if you're one of those people who insists their soup be gluten-free. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to play along, let me know your location and local time down in the comments, because there's something oddly fun about imagining who else is lying in bed, listening to medieval soup stories across the world now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door closes behind you with a groan, and suddenly you're inside. The world shrinks to timber walls, low beams, and a room half lit by fire and candle. Your nose immediately tells you what kind of place this is. The stew has been simmering since morning. No, scratch that. Since last weekend, the air feels more edible than breathable. Steam clings to your hair, coats your eyelashes, and makes you wonder if this was the medieval version of a facial treatment. Spoiler? No, it was just dinner in the making. The stew, of course, is the star of the inn's olfactory show. A giant cauldron hangs over the hearth, blackened and crusted where broth has boiled over too many times to count. Meat, vegetables, grains all indistinguishable by now form a single, shapeless concoction. Historians still argue whether in stews were actually nourishing, or if they were just culinary graveyards where yesterday's leftovers got recycled until unrecognizable. Either way, the smell seeps into every corner, every bench, every blanket. You could probably wring soup out of the floor rushes, but the stew alone doesn't explain the wall of scent. The fire plays its part, puffing smoke whenever the wind shifts down the chimney. Your eyes sting a little. The rafters above are dark, not from age, but from decades of soot layering over itself, and that smoky tang clings to everything: bread, crusts, hair, even the coins you hand across the counter. Then there's ale, sweet, yeasty, and just a little sour. It perfumes the room even before a mug is set in front of you. Medieval ale was weak compared to modern beer, brewed more like liquid bread than party fuel, but in an inn it was consumed by the gallon. The sticky temps of fermentation clings to mugs, pitchers, and the wood of the very tables. You don't need to drink to smell it. You breathe and it's already in your throat. Of course, nothing in here is sanitized. Cleanliness isn't exactly a priority. The floor is strewn with rushes, think straw sprinkled with herbs to mask spills, but those herbs are long faded, and what you really get is the sour, moldy undertone of wet straw trodden by countless muddy boots. It's rustic, sure, but rustic in the way that makes you think about tetanus shots. Still, as you take a cautious step further inside, there's comfort in the chaos. These smells, overwhelming as they are signals of survival. Stew means food, smoke means warmth, ale means community. In a world where you could freeze in a ditch or starve in a field, the heavy, smelly hug of an inn was reassurance that you'd live another night. And maybe that's why people tolerated the Stewandale fog without complaint. You settle onto a bench near the hearth, cloak damp from the night air, and notice how quickly the inn's smells absorb into you. Your wool catches smoke like a sponge. The faint scent of mutton stew clings to your sleeves. Tomorrow, when you walk out into the road, anyone within 3 feet will know you spent the night in company. You're a walking advertisement for the inn though, not necessarily a flattering one, and there are subtler notes. 2. Once your nose adjusts, charred onions, garlic crushed beneath a boot heel, candle wax dripping into the rushes, leather drying by the fire, even the sharp tang of iron nails from horseshoes hung near the wall for repair, these all layer into what you'd call the signature scent of medieval hospitality. Bath and Body Works has yet to bottle it, for reasons we should all be grateful for. Some details make you wonder about the daily rhythm here. Did the pot ever get fully emptied, or was it a continuous cycle of topping up, so that a trace of stew from a month ago still lived on in today's dinner? Some fringe food historians suggest exactly that. A perpetual stew, bubbling day after day, with new ingredients added on top of old. The flavor would deepen, sure, but so would the mystery of what exactly you're eating. It's like a sourdough starter except, instead of bread, it's beef, sinew and cabbage stalks. The other inn patrons don't seem to notice the wall of scent. Maybe they're used to it. Maybe the ale dulls the nose. Or maybe, in a world where streets reek of dung, tanneries, and stagnant water, the inn's bouquet of stew and smoke is downright pleasant by comparison. It's the medieval equivalent of a scented candle, comforting, predictable, a reminder that you're in the right place. As you lean back, you let yourself sink into the moment. The door rattles again, letting in a gust of cold night air, and for a heartbeat you catch a contrast, the sharp smell of wet earth and manure from outside. Before the inn stew fog swallows it whole, there's no escaping it. You're marinated now, inside and out. The bench greets you with a sticky kiss on your elbows, the kind of tacky resistance only centuries of spilled ale can produce. You shift slightly, but it doesn't matter, every surface here has absorbed its share of drink. The oak tables are wide and rough, carved with initials, scratches, and the odd dice gouge. They tell a silent history, travellers pausing for warmth, merchants sealing deals, soldiers celebrating or sulking. But more immediate than any carving is the feeling that if you leave your mug unattended for 2 minutes, it might fuse to the wood permanently. Ale defines this space as much as stew. The sweet sour temps wafts from every jug and mug, mingling with the sharpness of iron nails in the benches. Unlike modern beer, medieval ale often skipped the hops, meaning it was sweeter, heavier, and spoiled quickly. You drink it fresh or not at all. And because fresh meant brewed in the last 3 days, the inn always smelled faintly like a bakery that forgot to ventilate. Historians still argue whether ale counted as hydration or malnutrition with extra bubbles. Either way, your choice is simple. Sip the cloudy stuff, or risk the questionable well water. When you finally take a cautious gulp, the flavor matches the smell, bready, yeasty, and vaguely fruity, with the aftertaste of wood from the mug itself. It's not unpleasant, though it doesn't exactly make you want to order a second pint. Yet the regulars drink it like water, chatting, gesturing, sloshing. A few drops land on your sleeve, and you know those stains aren't going anywhere. Even the air feels a little sticky, as if the molecules themselves are saturated with sugar. The innkeeper doesn't mind. Spills are part of the decor. Instead of scrubbing, he lets the floor rushes soak it all in, maybe throwing down a handful of herbs now and then. That means the ground underfoot smells like a medieval cocktail, ale, sweat, ashes, and lavender stalks all mashed together. Step too firmly, and the squish releases a puff of scent like some cursed potpourri sachet. And then there are the patrons themselves, leaning in close as they talk, breathing out clouds of ale on each other's faces. You can't escape it. Their laughter is soaked in drink, their hiccups punctuated by little sprays of yeast and malt. In some ways, it's communal, all marinating together in the same sticky haze. In others, it's vaguely suffocating. You find yourself wondering if medieval noses just gave up, deciding not to register the onslaught anymore. There's also the curious role of the alewife. Many inns, especially smaller ones, ran on brews concocted in backrooms or kitchens by women who knew how to coax barley into drinkable liquid. These brews weren't standardized. Every batch had its quirks. One might taste pleasantly nutty, the next faintly of cabbage water, yet both would flow from the same tap. Some fringe accounts even suggest a few alewives added herbs with mild, psychoactive effects, whether for flavor, for medicine, or just to keep customers coming back. That would certainly explain some of the rowdier singing in the corner. The smell of ale isn't just in the mugs, it's baked into the furniture. The benches, worn smooth in some places and splintery in others, carry a permanent tang of fermentation. If you pressed your nose to the wood, you'd swear it was still damp, even after centuries. You realize that's what you're leaning your elbows on, a centuries deep soak of barley, yeast, and human carelessness. A medieval varnish of sorts. Some nights, the smell tips into overwhelming. The air grows heavy, and even your hair feels like it's coated in sugar. But for the weary traveler, that stickiness is a sign of welcome. Sticky tables mean people have been here before you, finding warmth, food, and laughter. They're proof the place is alive, buzzing, and ready to soak you in as its next layer. You glance again at your ale, at the froth collapsing into a cloudy pool. Drink up, or don't. The smell alone ensures you'll carry a little bit of the inn with you long after you leave. You shift again on the sticky bench, and your gaze drifts to the hearth, always the heart of an inn. Always the culprit behind the thick stew smell that wraps itself around your face like a damp blanket. The cauldron swings slightly over the fire, iron blackened from decades of heat. Its rim crusted with ancient residue that no amount of scrubbing has ever truly removed. Not that anyone here really tries. The truth is simple. Kitchens in medieval inns were rarely, if ever, fully cleaned at best. The pot is refreshed. Yesterday's barley becomes today's barley, bulked out with whatever meat scraps or root vegetables the innkeeper scrounged from the market. Bones bob along until they disintegrate, adding both flavor and mystery to every serving. Historians still argue whether this was efficient genius or reckless negligence. Some call it the Perpetual stew, a dish that never ended, only evolved. The idea is equal parts fascinating and stomach-churning. A pot that could, in theory, trace its ancestry back months or even years. Like a family tree you could eat, though you might not want to. As you edge closer to the hearth, the smell grows more complicated. There's the rich savor of fat melting into broth, yes, but beneath that lies something earthier, almost metallic. Old cabbage leaves wilt in the liquid, lending their sulfurous perfume. Onions have been boiled so long they've given up, their sweetness now part of the air rather than the stew. And somewhere deep down, a hint of sourness suggests that not every ingredient went into the pot at its freshest. You wonder if this is why medieval recipes loved to call for strong spices, not to enhance, but to disguise. The cauldron itself tells a story. Its sides are coated in layers of seasoning built up over years, each new batch fusing to the old like geological strata. That black, cracked shell isn't dirt so much as culinary memory. Fringe kitchen lore even suggests that innkeepers prized these crusts, believing the pot cooked better with its own smoky seasoning intact. A little burnt fat here, a little charred onion there, together They made the stew what it was. Scrubbing it clean would be like erasing its soul. But this approach has consequences. The kitchen never smells fresh. The smoke from the fire mixes with the constant broth stink, weaving a tapestry that clings to the rafters. And because the chimney rarely draws properly, the whole room is smoky, the air greasy. Your skin feels faintly coated after only a few minutes, as if you've been basted like a roast. This is less a kitchen and more a slow cooker you happen to be standing inside. You picture the kitchen staff, sweating and red-faced, stirring the cauldron with paddles taller than you. Their aprons are stiff with grease, their hair carrying the stew's perfume even when they sneak outside for air, and they never quite get away from it. In towns where inns were crammed wall to wall, neighbors could probably identify each establishment by its specific stew scent drifting out the window. Ah yes, one might say. That's the beef bone broth with turnips that haven't seen better days. The idea of cleanliness wasn't absent, it just wasn't our idea of cleanliness. Kitchens were swept, pots topped up, counters wiped with rags, but soap, disinfectants, and running water, forget it. A quick rinse in a wooden bucket was the most these pots got between servings. Quirky tidbit. Some records suggest innkeepers deliberately left a bit of old broth to sour in the cauldron overnight, believing the acid helped preserve the pot for the next day. Was it science or superstition? Historians still argue. Either way, you're glad you can't see bacteria with the naked eye. And yet, as your nose keeps adjusting, something happens. What first felt overwhelming starts to become oddly cozy. The smell of perpetual stew might not be appetizing in the modern sense, but it's reassuring. It means dinner is always ready, always hot, always shared. In a world of uncertainty, there was comfort in knowing the pot never stopped simmering. You lean back and realize the truth. This inn doesn't just smell of stew, it is stew. The walls have absorbed it, the beams are steeped in it, and even the air between conversations feels like part of the recipe. You've stepped inside a meal that has been cooking for generations. The warmth of the hearth keeps tugging you closer, but your attention drifts now to the steady clatter of mugs being set down and refilled. This isn't just stew territory, it's ale country, too. Behind the counter, in a room half hidden by a curtain, lives the true engine of the inn, the alewife and her bubbling barrels. She's the one keeping the place wet with drink, and she knows exactly how much power that gives her. Ale in medieval times wasn't a luxury, it was a staple. The brewing water got boiled, which meant it was safer than the town's murky wells. Even children drank weak ale, sometimes called small beer, because it was often the only safe liquid around. So when you take a sip of your mug cloudy warm and a little sour, you're not drinking for fun, you're drinking to survive. Historians still argue whether people genuinely preferred it over water, or if it was simply the least risky option. Either way, ale is why inns always smelled faintly like a bread factory that forgot to open its windows. The alewife, yes. Usually a woman was more than just a brewer. She was the unofficial mayor of her establishment, deciding who got served, who got cut off, and which rumors were worth repeating. Brewing wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave women an unusual slice of economic control. Step into her back room and you'd see wide vats made of wood, steam rising from malted barley mashed into a hot, sticky porridge. The scent of fermenting grain is sharp and sweet, like porridge left too long on the stove. The quirky part, recipes were rarely written down. Each alewife had her own secret method, passed by word of mouth or adjusted based on whatever herbs grew nearby. One in might flavour its brew with bog myrtle or yarrow, while another leaned on rosemary or even heather. That means each ale carried a slightly different bouquet. And walking through town, you could probably tell which batch was being poured just by the air outside the door. Imagine pubs today competing not with neon signs, but with competing smells wafting into the street. Of course, not everyone trusted the alewife. Fringe pamphlets and local gossip sometimes painted her as shady, maybe even dangerous. Was she skimming grain, watering down the brew? Worse, was she adding things that didn't belong? Some stories suggest herbs with mild narcotic or aphrodisiac effects might slip into the pot accidentally or on purpose. Historians still argue whether this was real practice or just sexist suspicion. Either way, every sniff of ale carried not just yeast and malt, but also the possibility of mystery ingredients. You raise your mug again, and the smell grows stronger as the froth laps your nose. Wet bread, overripe apples, and a faint tang of vinegar. The drink is alive in the way modern beers are carefully prevented from being. Tiny flecks float in the cloudy liquid, proof that the straining process was, let's say, rustic. You could chew this ale if you wanted. In fact, chewiness was considered a sign of quality by some. The alewife bustles past, apron streaked with flour, ladle in one hand, towel in the other. She smells of yeast and wood smoke, her skin permanently perfumed by years of brewing. She pours another round, and the air thickens with malt and sweat. It's communal in a way stew never can be. Stew you eat quietly, hunched over your bowl. Ale you drink loudly, elbow to elbow, laughing and coughing and spilling. Each mug adds another sticky sheen to the table, another splash for the rushes to soak up. And that's the trick of it. The smell of ale isn't just in the drink, it's on the breath of every patron, in the damp cloths used to mop the counters, in the wooden vats themselves that never fully dry. This inn is less a building and more a living ferment, always bubbling, always frothing, always a little sour at the edges. As you drain your mug, you notice the truth. Stew might be the heart of the inn, but ale is its bloodstream. Without it, the chatter would falter, the laughter would thin, and the sticky tables would somehow feel empty. And without the smell of ale sweet, sour, bread-like, and faintly wild, no medieval inn would ever feel alive. Your elbows are already tattooed with sticky rings from the ale-stained tables. But now your senses start registering another layer of the inn's perfume. The people themselves. You glance around, and it hits you that stew and ale are only half the story. The other half comes from sweat, straw, and the jumble of strangers packed shoulder to shoulder. Every cloak draped over a bench radiates damp wool. That musty sheep pen scent that never truly washes out. Travellers have trudged through rain, mud, and manure-clogged streets. And now those journeys evaporate slowly in the smoky air. One man shrugs off his hood, and steam rises like he's a roast chicken pulled from an oven. You breathe in, and suddenly the inn smells of wet dog butt. It's just people drying by the hearth. Straw adds its own contribution. The floor is layered with rushes, a supposed attempt at freshness. In theory, herbs like lavender or mint should be sprinkled among them. In reality, most of what you smell is trampled grass, damp and beginning to ferment underfoot. The inn's bedding upstairs isn't much better. Sacks stuffed with straw that grow musty and sour after weeks of bodies rolling in them. You sit too long on one, and your clothes remember the scent for days. The strangers, though, are the real seasoning. A merchant smells faintly of spice, but also of sweat ground into his linen. A soldier carries the tang of iron from his armor straps. mingled with horsehair. The pilgrim in the corner exudes vinegar from his cheap wool cloak, treated to repel rain. All these people together create a human stew as complex as the one bubbling in the cauldron. Historians still argue whether medieval noses dulled with time, or if people genuinely found this mingling of scents comforting. Maybe both. One quirky tidbit. Medieval advice books often warned travelers about sharing beds with strangers, not for the smell, but for the risk of lice and fleas. Yet beds were expensive, so you'd often find yourself nose-to-nose with someone who smelled like garlic, onions, and the road. The inn was democracy by aroma. Everyone contributed to the air. You take another slow breath and realize the inn is alive, not just with food and drink, but with humanity itself. Sweaty, smoky, straw-scented humanity. You may wrinkle your nose, but there's no denying it. The smell is strangely reassuring. It tells you that you're not alone in this drafty world, even if your neighbor smells like a stable. Your nose twitches again as the serving maid passes by with a tray. And this time, the smell doesn't belong to ale or smoke or damp wool. It's dinner, the kind that tries its best to be enticing, but can't quite hide its secrets. The inn's stew pot may be the centerpiece, but the side dishes tell their own story, and most of them involve meat pies and fish that may have been caught a little too long ago. You lean over your bowl, steam rising into your face. The broth is thick, cloudy, and oddly comforting, smelling of garlic, onions, and a hint of pepper if you're lucky. Yet beneath the rich savor lurks something faintly sour, like cabbage gone soft in the market. Historians still argue whether medieval cooks deliberately leaned on heavy seasoning to mask food on the brink of spoiling, or if they simply liked the punch of spice. Either way, it means your stew has a personality: bold, strong, and slightly suspicious. The pies are no better. A thick crust of coarse flour, baked until hard, holds fillings that change with the day. Venison, if the hunting was good. Rabbit, if someone set a lucky snare, or just minced scraps of whatever was left from yesterday's pot. You bite into one, and the smell that escapes is rich, but oddly bittersweet, a combination of grease and spice that clings to your fingers long after. Medieval hand wipes. None. You're expected to lick your own sauce off. And then there's the fish. Oh, the fish. In towns far from the sea, fresh fish often arrived days after it left the water, carried inland in barrels of brine. By the time it hit your plate, it carried the unmistakable temps of the harbor, even if the nearest dock was 100 miles away. Quirky tidbit. Medieval inns sometimes leaned on dried stockfish, which had the unique ability to smell like glue even before cooking. The kitchen might soak it for days, pounding it with mallets until vaguely edible, but the smell of the sea never really left. Your nose twitches, and you're not sure if it's hunger or self-defense. Still, hunger wins out. The aroma of pepper and cloves floating from the pot makes you curious, and your spoon digs in again. That's the strange magic of these meals. They may smell odd, even alarming, but they're warm, heavy, and filling. In a world where famine lurked around every corner, the scent of stew and pies and fish, however questionable, meant you wouldn't go to bed empty. The inn hums with this truth. People chew noisily, smacking lips, dripping gravy onto the tables, and adding their own garlic-heavy breath to the air. Every dish leaves its fingerprint. So the inn doesn't just smell of food, it smells of everything food touches. Flour, dust, hot grease, singed crust, sour brine, and sweet spice. You realize your cloak will carry these perfumes long after you've left. A traveling pantry of medieval odors. Your spoon scrapes the bottom of the bowl, but before you can even decide whether to risk another bite of stew, your attention shifts upward. The ceiling looms low, beams crisscrossing like the ribs of some giant creature, and every one of them glistens faintly black. Centuries of smoke, grease, and tallow have left their fingerprints here, thick enough to choke a torch. The rafters themselves are less wood now than fossilized soot. The air carries it this mingling of candle smoke and cooking haze that seems to settle not just on the beams, but on your lungs. You breathe in, and it tastes faintly oily. That's the tallow candles, cheap, common, and absolutely foul-smelling. Instead of beeswax's gentle sweetness, tallow offers the nose a perfume of burned fat. Imagine cooking bacon, then leaving the pan on the stove for hours. That's the smell you're living in. A dozen candles drip their greasy tears onto the tables, and the wax pools in hardened lumps like pale stalactites. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually noticed how rank tallow smelled, or if their noses simply shrugged and accepted it as light as a price. The wealthy, of course, preferred beeswax, which gave a honeyed scent. But here in the inn, you're stuck with cow fat and sheep fat, burning steadily, each puff of smoke adding another coat to the ceiling. The hearth fire joins the party, throwing sparks now and then, coughing out extra smoke when the wind changes. You look up, and the room's haze forms visible layers, thickest near the beams, where no draft can clear it. Sometimes, drops of condensed grease actually fall from the rafters. Yes, it's raining kitchen history. Quirky tidbit. Travelers wrote about inns where the ceiling dripped so steadily that guests joked they were getting a second course, one they hadn't ordered. You rub your sleeve across the bench, and it comes away gritty. That's not dirt, it's soot and wax dust, rubbed into every surface by years of elbows, cloaks, and mugs. Even the walls smell faintly burnt, as though the entire building has been slow roasting since its foundation, and in a way, it has. Yet somehow, there's comfort in it. The mix of smoke and fat tells you the fire won't die. The candles won't dim. The inn will stay alive through the night. It may smell like a greasy forge, but it's steady light in a dark world. You sip your ale again, and realize you're drinking in the glow of every candle, every smoky beam, every dripping thread of tallow. The inn doesn't just smell of stew and ale anymore, it smells of fire itself, of light carved out of darkness, with burning fat and patient smoke. You're marinating in centuries of heat. Asterisk, asterisk, the night deepens, and with it the rhythm of the inn shifts. Dinner bowls clatter back toward the kitchen. Mugs refill with foamy ale, and the air grows noisier, thicker, and more alive. Dice scatter across tabletops. Wooden pieces slap against boards, and laughter bursts into the smoky rafters like sparks. With every roll and raucous cheer, the smells around you seem to wake up again, stirred by the restless energy of games and wagers. You lean closer to one table where three men hunch over dice, eyes narrowed in concentration. Each slam of a mug sends more ale spilling, freshening the sticky temps already soaked into the oak. The smell of malt and yeast rises like a fog as mugs clink, foam sloshes, and players cheer or curse. The floor beneath them is a graveyard of onion skins, chewed bones, and stale crusts ground into the rushes. With every stomp of a boot, the inn exhales a puff of musty herb and sour ale. A little homemade incense for gamblers. Board games add their own atmosphere. A pair of travellers play nine men's maris. Leaning so close, their breath mingles on the wooden grid scratched into the table itself. Garlic, onions, and barley leak from their lips, combining into a perfume strong enough to keep anyone from leaning over their shoulders. You half expect the pieces themselves to smell it, one greasy from fingers, still slick with stew. Historians still argue whether gambling in inns was tolerated as harmless fun or scorned as sinful distraction. Either way, the clatter of dice was as common as the smell of stew, and the two became inseparable in memory. Imagine walking into an inn. Before you even see the hearth, you hear dice roll, and you smell the sour-sweet air of ale-soaked competition. A quirky tidbit: some dice were carved from animal bone, and travelers claimed they held a meaty smell long after. Whether truth or tavern exaggeration, the thought alone makes you eye the cubes more closely as they tumble across the wood. Perhaps that faint tang in the air isn't just spilled ale, but also a little ghost of the ox that became tonight's dice. Music begins in the corner of fiddler, scraping out a tune. Each note seems to stir the air, pushing smoke and drink and sweat around the room until they swirl together like broth in the cauldron. The laughter grows louder, bodies lean closer, and the inn takes on its nighttime scent, a concoction of sweat-slicked gamblers, frothy mugs, burnt candle tallow, and onion breath bouncing to the rhythm of dice. You realize now that the smell of the inn is more than food or fire. It's the iving musk of entertainment. Every laugh, every wager, every dropped crumb adds to the aroma. It's not clean, not fresh, but it's undeniably alive. You rub your eyes against the haze of smoke and candle grease, but before you can even take another sip, something brushes your ankle. Not a human foot, no, this is fur. You glance down, and there it is, a scruffy dog nosing around under the benches, tail wagging lazily as it scavenges for dropped bones. The dog smells of wet hide and hearth ash, with just a hint of manure clinging to its paws. Welcome to another layer of the inn's olfactory orchestra. The animals, dogs, of course, are everywhere, some belonging to the innkeeper, others trailing travelers. They lick the floor clean of grease, and when they curl up near the fire, they release a warm, musky scent that mingles with the tallow and stew. Cats slink across rafters and tabletops, eyes glinting in the dim light. Their smell is subtler fur, a little dust, sometimes a whiff of fish if they've raided the kitchen scraps. Every so often, one hops onto a bench, brushing its tail against a patron's face. No one complains. The cats keep the rats in check, and then there are the less welcome guests. Chickens cluck in the corner, scratching through the rushes for crumbs. Their feathers shed a faint barnyard musk, and occasionally one flaps wildly, sending up a fresh puff of dust and herb-scented straw. Horses outside in the stables add their contribution too, their sour-sweet manure scent drifting in whenever the door swings open. A gust of night air doesn't bring freshness. It brings the smell of damp hay, dung, and animal sweat, blending seamlessly with the stew fog inside. Quirky tidbit: some inns even let travelers keep pigs inside overnight, either because the stables were full or because the animals were too valuable to risk outdoors. Imagine trying to sleep with a snuffling hog rooting near your bed. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just rural eccentricity, but either way, the piggy musk would have lingered long after the animals left. You sip your ale, and the dog at your feet sighs, settling into a nap. His smell is strong but strangely grounding. In a way, these animals make the inn feel more like home, messy, noisy, smelly, but alive. Without them, the place would seem sterile to human. With them, it's a barn, a tavern, and a family hearth all at once. The inn doesn't just smell of stew and ale. You realize it smells of every creature that finds shelter here. Dogs snoring, cats prowling, chickens scratching, horses steaming outside in the cold. The building breathes not just with people, but with the entire barnyard. And tonight, you're part of that menagerie too. Asterisk, asterisk, the inn doesn't quiet, it thickens. You notice it now more than ever, because the scents no longer stay politely at their corners. Instead, they weave and wrestle in midair, forming layers that stick to your skin and clothes. Smoke from the hearth still dominates, clinging to your hair so thoroughly you'll carry it out tomorrow like a badge of attendance. Yet beneath it rises the yeasty sweetness of ale, the tense of sweat, and the faint sharpness of onions that seem to linger even after the bowls have been scraped clean. If you breathe a little deeper, you can almost separate them, like picking out instruments in an orchestra. There's the heavy bass note of simmering meat, deep and constant. The trebly sharpness of spilled vinegar cuts through occasionally. And every time someone stirs the rushes underfoot, a musty, herbal undertone puffs up like a drumbeat. The overall effect is not unlike a stew for the nose, each element blending but never completely losing its shape. Historians still argue whether medieval people were nose-blind to these mixtures, or if they noticed them as much as you do now. Some suggest that constant exposure dulled their senses. Others believe folks simply accepted the cocktail of smells as normal, even comforting. You can test that theory for yourself tonight. The longer you sit here, the more the stench transforms into something like background music, still pungent, still chaotic, but familiar, a quirky tidbit. Travelers sometimes sprinkled crushed juniper berries or rosemary onto the rushes, not for show, but to freshen the air. In theory, this worked. In practice, the herbs mingled with beer puddles, dog fur, and human sweat, creating aromas that smelled less like a meadow and more like an herbal experiment gone rogue. Imagine trying to mask garlic breath with a sprig of thyme. You'd only succeed in smelling like garlic and thyme. The physical air thickens with heat, too. Each body pumps warmth into the room, and soon the smell of wool damp with sweat rises. Cloaks hung on pegs drip faintly from earlier rain, releasing an earthy dampness. Boots reek of mud and manure, tracked in from the road, drying by the hearth until the entire inn carries the ghost of the countryside inside its walls. And yet, despite this chaos, your nose begins to expect it. Without the stew's rich haze, without the yeasty temps of spilled ale, without the faint musk of animals underfoot, the inn would feel empty. What modern minds might call foul, a medieval traveller would call comfort. Smell, in this place, is not an assault, it is presence. Asterisk, asterisk, the hour grows late, but the inn shows no signs of surrender. The scents shift subtly as the evening stretches on, changing character as food gives way to fatigue. Earlier, the air was thick with onions and garlic, sharp, brazen, impossible to ignore. Now, those notes fade, leaving behind softer echoes, the sweet residue of malt clinging to mugs, the faint temps of grease congealing on empty bowls, and a sleepy haze of smoke still curling upward like the inn's lullaby. You lean back and notice how time alters smell. What was once appetizing rich stew bubbling over the fire now smells heavier, almost sour as it cools in the cauldron. Ale, once crisp and lively, turns stale when left sitting in mugs, releasing a vinegar-tinged whiff every time a player sloshes his dice hand. The rushes on the floor, already layered with crumbs and drips, now carry a low, damp odor of decay as the night's mess presses deeper under stomping boots. Historians still argue whether medieval people cleaned out rushes weekly, seasonally, or whenever the mood struck. If tonight is anything to judge by, you'd bet on rarely. The floor feels alive beneath you, a patchwork of herbs, bones, beer stains, and dust, each exhaling its own tired perfume. A quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers claimed that inns smelt strongest at night precisely because the fire burned low. Without a roaring blaze to eat the odors, the smoky veil thinned, leaving every sour breath, sweaty cloak, and greasy pot more noticeable. The fire that once masked the smells now seems to surrender, letting them step forward to dance in the cooling air around you. Patrons lean closer in conversation, voices hushed, bodies tired. The smell of sweat has deepened, less sharp, more leathery, like worn boots left too long in the rain. Cloaks pulled tighter release the aroma of wool and smoke that has soaked into every fiber. You catch a draft as the door creaks open, bringing in not fresh relief, but the cold, wet scent of night earth. It blends instantly into the mix. Another instrument added to the late evening symphony. The inn at this hour doesn't just smell its size. The aromas feel slower, heavier, like the building itself is winding down, though its people are still awake. You realize that scent here is not static. It changes with the clock, just as surely as the light fades outside. Asterisk, asterisk. The dice quiet, the fiddler tucks away his bow, and the long night tilts toward its softer hours. Yet the inn doesn't truly rest, it only changes tempo. As laughter dims, new smells step forward, ones that were hiding under the noise of roasted meat and foaming ale. Now, in the lull, they assert themselves, subtle but insistent. You notice first the people. A traveler slumps against the wall, boots kicked off, unleashing a pungent aroma of leather soaked in sweat and rain. Wool socks, damp and weary, add their own sour note to the mix. Across the room, a group of merchants whisper over their last mugs, their breath carrying stale onions and the faint sweetness of clove-studded wine. The air is thicker now with human presence, exhalations, sweat, and the musk of tired bodies leaning too close for too long. There's an intimacy to it, though, a sense of shared survival. Everyone here has trudged through mud, carried damp cloaks, and smelled worse on the road. Historians still argue whether medieval noses were more tolerant, or whether people simply stopped noticing after the first whiff. Either way, in this space, no one complains. The smell of humanity is just another wall holding the room together. Then there's the bedding. Straw mattresses pulled from storage exhale an earthy dust, tinged with mildew from nights of damp air. Lice and fleas, unseen but felt, bring their own subtle sourness and odor you can't quite name but somehow recognize. A quirky tidbit. Some inns sprinkled crushed wormwood or lavender into straw to drive away pests, but over time the herbs rotted, leaving the beds smelling less like a garden and more like a compost heap. Still, a weary traveler would sink into it gladly, nose half stuffed from smoke anyway. You hear the soft shifting of animals settling for the night. Dogs curl tighter near the hearth, their warm, musky scent intensifying as they doze. A chicken, tucked into a corner, lets out a sleepy cluck, feathers rustling with a faint barnyard temps. From the stables outside, a horse nickers low, and the draft brings in hay and manure, like a reminder that the inn is never far from the farm. The smells of the night are quieter, yes, but also more personal. They cling to bodies, to beds, to breath. They're not masked by boiling broth or merry cheers. They are the inn's truest, self-raw, unperfumed, and intimate. As you sit there breathing it in, you realize the smell of stew and ale is only the beginning. What lingers deepest is the scent of human closeness. Asterisk, asterisk, by now, the fire has burned down to a cradle of embers, glowing orange beneath the iron cauldron. The steady crackle has softened into the occasional pop, and the air has grown cooler, making the scents inside seem sharper. Without the constant heat, smoke drifts lazily instead of rushing upward, so it hangs lower, clinging to your cloak, seeping into your hair. You'll carry it out of here tomorrow whether you like it or not. The cauldron itself holds only scraps, but even those scraps release their perfume, a faint broth of marrow bones, a ghost of garlic, a simmering whisper of barley. Combined with the sour edge of ale gone flat, the smell is less feast and more leftovers, yet there's comfort in its reassurance that food was shared, bellies were filled, and warmth was kept against the cold. Historians still argue whether these late-night leftovers were saved for tomorrow or tossed aside. Some records suggest thrifty innkeepers reheated the same pot day after day, topping it up with whatever scraps arrive. Others hint that the remains fed the dogs, the pigs, or even the compost. What's certain is that the smell never left. The cauldron was never quite empty, never quite clean, and always carried yesterday forward. A quirky tidbit. Travellers sometimes called this perpetual broth perpetual stew, and some swore the pot in certain inns hadn't been fully emptied in decades. Imagine inhaling the aroma of a stew that contains, in some faint molecule, the meat of long-forgotten feasts. You'd practically be breathing history with every spoonful. The embers themselves add another note-charred wood, half-smothered ash, a dusty dryness that settles in the throat. Candles sputter low, dripping their tallow onto wooden holders, and the fat burns with a faintly sour smell, like spoilt butter. Together, they form the inn's lullaby scent, smoky, fatty, faintly sour, but undeniably warm. You shift closer to the fire, and the dog at your feet stretches, releasing a little whiff of singed fur from lying too close to the hearth. Outside, a cold draft seeps under the door, carrying with it the earthy dampness of night soil and wet hay. The blend of inside and outside the hearth and the earth wraps the room like a blanket of odors. That is the inn at its quietest. The smells no longer masked by music or laughter, just raw, settling, lingering, a stew of air, cooled and softened, that will cradle every sleeper until dawn. *** sleep begins to creep across the benches and straw pallets, and with it, the smells of slumber thicken. You notice first the steady hush of breathing, dozens of lungs exhaling warmth into the already heavy air. Each breath carries a trace of the day: onions, garlic, smoke, wine, or ale. With so many bodies packed close, the room develops a warm, sour-sweet musk of breath layered upon breath, a human fog that no open window could hope to clear. You shift on your own bench, and the straw rustles beneath you. Its smell is earthy, tinged with mildew where damp boots and cloaks have pressed against it. Someone nearby snores, releasing little bursts of stew-scented air with every exhale. It's almost comical, like the room itself sighs stew back into existence even though the pot has long cooled. Historians still argue whether travelers truly tolerated these shared sleeping spaces or if complaints were constant. Diaries suggest both. Some accepted it as the cost of shelter, while others grumbled about stench, fleas, and restless neighbors. Either way, the record is clear: personal space was a luxury, not a guarantee. Tonight, you're wedged shoulder to shoulder with strangers, their smells as unavoidable as their snores. A quirky tidbit. It was said that you could judge the wealth of an inn not by its food, but by its bedding. Poor inns stuffed mattresses with plain straw, while richer ones mixed in hay or even feathers. Feathers, of course, brought their own smell, loyally, musty, and faintly barnyard-like. Imagine trying to sleep on a bed that smells like a chicken coop. comfort comes at a price, and it isn't always fragrance. Around you, bodies settle deeper into sleep. Cloaks pulled tight release more woolly musk, mingled with the sharp tang of sweat drying on skin. Boots lined up by the hearth give off their leather and mud perfume as they steam. The embers whisper low, sending out the faint dusty smell of dying fire. Outside, a rooster stirs too early. Its cry muffled, but its scent barnyard and dunk sneaking in through the cracks. The inn has transformed. What was once a hall of laughter and stew is now a dormitory of breath, sweat, and wool. It smells less like celebration, more like survival. And yet, wrapped in it, you find yourself lulled not despite the odors, but because of them. These are the smells of shared shelter, of walls that keep out the dark. Asterisk, asterisk. Dawn does not arrive with silence. It seeps in through cracks in the shutters, first as a thin grey light, then as a chill draught that tickles across the rushes. The inn stirs reluctantly, and with that stirring comes a whole new tide of smells. Morning air doesn't cleanse so much as rearrange. The sour musk of sleep-wore cloaks, damp straw, and stale breath still hangs heavy. But now it is joined by the faintly metallic scent of dew on stone and the sharper tang of manure from the stable yard. Someone stretches, boots thudding against the rushes, and the motion releases the smell of crushed herbs and trampled scraps from last night. Dogs yawn, their warm breath carrying the memory of stolen bones. A cat leaps down from a beam, shaking loose dust that smells like old wood and soot. The whole room shifts and exhales, as though the inn itself is waking with its patrons. Historians still argue whether inns truly provided breakfast or simply expected travellers to carry their own provisions. Some evidence suggests bread and ale were the default morning offering, while others claim porridge or leftover stew made an appearance. Either way, the first scents of food creep in again as the cauldron is nudged back to life and loaves are torn open. Stale bread has its own fragrance, dry, floury, with a faint sourness that makes your mouth water more from memory than from freshness. A quirky tidbit: medieval people sometimes drank small ale. For breakfast a week, low alcohol brew safer than water. Imagine waking to the smell of barley mash instead of coffee. It's a gentle aroma, yeasty and sweet, like the faint steam of warm grain, combined with wood smoke from the rekindled hearth. It gives the morning air a softer, more forgiving edge. Outside, the stable boys are already at work. Hooves stamp, chains clink, and the smell of horses strong, warm, and earthy pours in through the open door. Hay dust drifts inside with the light, mixing with the smoke until the air smells both barn and hearth at once. It is less crowded now, less chaotic than last night, but still thick with life. The Stewandel signature of the inn doesn't vanish with morning, it lingers, softened by sleep and stirred anew by breakfast. It clings to your cloak, to your hair, to your very skin, so that even when you step outside, the world will know where you spent the night. Asterisk, asterisk, you step outside for a moment, rubbing your eyes against the pale light of early morning. The cold air hits you like a splash of water, and suddenly you realize how saturated you've become with the inn's perfume. Every fold of your cloak smells of smoke. Your hair carries the sweetness of malt and the faint bite of garlic. Even your boots reek of damp rushes and spilled ale. The inn scent has claimed you, stitched itself into your fibers like an invisible souvenir. Travelers knew this well. The smell of an inn clung to people long after they left, so much so that you could often guess where someone had spent the night just by the aroma shadowing them. Historians still argue whether medieval folks considered this shameful or simply part of the road. Was it a mark of hospitality enjoyed, or a stench endured? Perhaps both, depending on the nose doing the sniffing. A quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers joked that you could smell a man's lodging more reliably than you could ask it. Inns, they claimed, gave off odors so distinct that a rider entering town the next day carried the signature of his shelter like a badge. You wouldn't need a map, you'd need a nose. As you breathe in the fresher air, you notice the contrast. Outside, it's all earth and damp grass, horse dung and wood smoke curling from chimneys. It feels sharp, almost cleansing, but your body still hums with the Stewandale fog of the night before. You're like a walking hearth pot, trailing onions and malt down the road, and you know it will linger. The smell will seep from your clothes for days, maybe longer, until another fire, another stew, replaces it. Inside, the inn remains a cauldron of its own. Dogs stir, patrons mutter, mugs clink. The stew is rekindled, its onion garlic perfume rising once again. The inn is eternal in this way, a place where food, fire, ale, animals, and people combine to create an atmosphere that refuses to be confined to walls. It sticks, it follows, it announces. You realize the smell of medieval inns was not a momentary inconvenience. It was a traveling companion, a reminder carried on the body long after the night ended. Once you walked into an inn, you walked out with it. As the day stretches forward, you start to understand the cycle. The inn isn't just a building, it's a cauldron that never empties, always simmering, always feeding itself on the lives moving through it. By midday, the scent shifts again. Fresh logs tossed on the fire release resinous smoke that sharpens the air. The cauldron bubbles with new ingredients. Perhaps a rabbit from a passing hunter. Perhaps only more barley and onions, and the stew renews its dominance. Rich and familiar, the ale flows again, yeasty and frothy, reasserting itself as the inn's other constant perfume. Historians still argue whether innkeepers cared about variety in flavor or if the goal was merely sustenance. The records are thin, but the general sense is that predictability ruled. You didn't come to an inn expecting surprise. You came expecting stew, ale, a roof, and the smells that proved them real. In fact, the very sameness may have been a comfort. Imagine trudging across miles of cold mud and arriving at a doorway where you instantly knew by scent alone that warmth and food awaited. A quirky tidbit. Some travelers wrote that they could recognize their favorite inns by smell before they even saw the sign swinging outside. The Stewandale fog drifted out the door and down the street, a medieval form of advertising. No painted symbol could compete with the whiff of garlic broth and malty foam wafting into the night. Back inside, the floor is freshly scattered with herbs, but you know better now. Within hours, the new greenery will be trampled, soaked, and transformed into the same musty cocktail as yesterday. Dogs and cats return to their scavenging. Dice roll again, mugs clink, voices rise, and the air thickens with life. The inn resets, like a stage prepared for the next act. You realize at last that the smell of stew and ale wasn't incidental, it was the core of the experience. The glue binding strangers together in this smoky, noisy, aromatic refuge. The inn always smelled of stew and ale, because without them, it wouldn't have been an inn at all. Night comes again, softer this time, as though the inn itself sighs with familiarity. The rhythm has repeated so many times that you can almost predict it. Stew thickening in the pot, ale frothing over mugs, laughter and smoke twining in the rafters. The smells are no longer surprises, they are companions. Garlic, malt, Sweat, wool, rushes, dogs, and wood smoke have woven themselves into a single tapestry that defines the place more firmly than stone or timber ever could. And so you sit with it one last time, breathing it in. What was once overwhelming has become almost tender. The sharpness of onions feels like a reminder of meals shared. The musk of dogs and straw feels like warmth rather than filth. Even the sour tang of spilled ale feels less like waste and more like proof of joy. You realize that this was always the secret. The inn's smell wasn't just tolerated, it was expected, needed, even loved. Historians still argue whether medieval people noticed these scents as keenly as we imagine, or if we modern noses dramatize them. But debates aside, one truth remains. The stew and the ale, endlessly simmered and endlessly poured, left their mark on every patron, every cloak, every memory. They were the invisible heart of the inn. A quirky tidbit. Some folklore even suggested that good fortune followed the smell of stew smoke down the road, guiding travelers like a beacon. The scent itself was the welcome, drifting out to those in need, and perhaps, in its way, it still is. Now the inn settles again into its night. Embers crackle low, mugs empty, and bodies curl into cloaks. The smells soften with the hour, fading into a gentle haze. They no longer demand your attention, they lull you instead. So here, in the dim hush of a medieval inn, you let yourself drift. The last wisps of stew and ale swirl around you, not sharp now, but muted, like distant music carried on a breeze. The smoke in the rafters folds itself into the shadows, no longer stinging, only warm. The wool of your cloak presses close, releasing its earthy scent, and the murmurs of sleepers fade to little more than background hum. The animals settle to a dog sighs by the fire, his musky breath slow and steady. A cat curls into a corner, whiskers twitching in dreams. Even the horses outside stamp only faintly, their smell of hay and earth drifting in like a reminder of the wider world, but far away. Safe beyond the door, your senses soften, and what was once a jumble of odors, garlic, malt, sweat, straw, melts together into something strangely soothing. No longer stew, no longer ale, no longer smoke or wool, but simply warmth, shelter, presence, the smell of belonging in a place where strangers became companions, if only for a night. The inn exhales with you, as though the building itself sleeps. The fire breathes in embers, the air rests, and the night folds quiet around your shoulders. You know tomorrow the cycle will begin again. Fresh stew, fresh ale, fresh laughter, but for now, it is enough just to lie here, carried by the scent of rest. So close your eyes, let the aroma of wood smoke and malt drift farther and farther away, until it is no more than a whisper. Feel the stillness rise like a blanket. You are safe, warm, and welcome. And with that, the inn lets you go into sleep. ***, sweet dreams.